At 3 a.m., while a young woman screamed herself hoarse in a hospital bed, Dr. Harlan Voss stood outside her door, arms crossed, and laughed under his breath. Not a nervous laugh, not a tired laugh, a satisfied one. He pulled out his phone, typed a single message, "She's still holding," and slipped it back into his coat pocket before walking away. He didn't check on her. He didn't even knock. He just walked away, and the screaming continued behind him, like something he had already decided didn't matter. That is where this story begins, not with the pillow, not with the nails. It begins with a man who knew exactly what was happening in room 517 and chose deliberately to let it go on. If this story moves you, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling me the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me, because what comes next will change the way you see everything. The hospital had a particular kind of quiet that Rachel Pierce had learned to distrust. It wasn't the quiet of rest or healing. It was the kind of quiet that happened when people had agreed, without saying so out loud, to stop asking certain questions. St. Mary's Memorial had that quiet on every floor, at every hour, but it was heaviest after midnight, and heaviest of all on the 5th floor, where the private rooms lined the east corridor like sealed boxes. Rachel had been a nurse for 11 years. She had done 3 of those years in a trauma unit in Baltimore, 2 in a pediatric ward in Virginia, and the last 6 at St. Mary's, mostly on the night shift because that was what they offered her when she applied and she needed the work. She was not the kind of nurse who got assigned to private cases involving powerful families. She was not the kind of nurse who got noticed by administrators or thanked by attending physicians. She was a part-timer, which in hospital language meant she was somewhere between essential and disposable, depending on the week. But on the night of October 14th, the nurse originally assigned to the East Corridor called in sick, and Rachel was the one who got the call at 9:45 p.m. asking if she could come in. She said yes because she always said yes. She didn't know, when she put on her scrubs and drove through the dark towards St. Mary's, that she was driving towards something she would spend the rest of her life reckoning with. She arrived at 10:15. The charge nurse, a woman named Donna Briggs, who had worked nights at St. Mary's for 22 years and had a way of communicating enormous amounts of disdain through the smallest possible gestures, handed Rachel the floor assignment with 2 fingers and said, "East Corridor, rooms 510 through 520. 517 is Montgomery. Don't bother her unless she calls. She won't call." Rachel took the clipboard. "Is there a specific reason she won't call?" Donna's expression suggested this was a deeply stupid question. Because she's been told her issues are psychological and she's finally stopped arguing about it. The night team has been through this with her 4 times this week. She knows the protocol. If she starts up again, you page Dr. Voss. You don't go in there on your own. You don't engage her distress. And you do not, under any circumstances, open that conversation about the pain again. Dr. Voss was very specific. What kind of pain is she reporting? Donna had already turned back to her station. Psychosomatic, read the chart. Rachel read the chart at the nurse's station before she began her rounds. The chart on Lila Montgomery was 43 pages long, which was unusual for a 21-year-old who had no documented history of serious illness before her admission 12 days ago. The admitting complaint had been severe, intermittent head pain, described by the patient as stabbing, positional, and worse when lying down. Neurological workup, negative. CT scan, unremarkable. MRI, clear. Blood panel, within normal limits. Psychiatric consultation notes, signed by a doctor, Elaine Marsh, concluded that the patient was experiencing grief-related somatic disorder following the recent deployment of her father, Admiral Victor Montgomery, to an undisclosed overseas assignment, and that the appropriate treatment was rest, mild sedation, and cognitive reframing. Rachel set the chart down. She had read a lot of psychiatric consultation notes in 11 years. They usually sounded like whoever wrote them was trying to close a door. This one sounded like the door had been welded shut. She started her rounds at 10:30. Rooms 510 through 516 were straightforward. An elderly man recovering from hip surgery who was awake and wanted to talk about his grandchildren. A woman in her 40s, post who was sleeping soundly. A teenager with a broken collarbone who had his headphones in and didn't acknowledge Rachel at all. She checked vitals, adjusted an IV, responded to a call button in 514, and made her notes. She reached room 517 at 11:05. She didn't go in. Donna had told her not to, and the patient was documented as stable, and there was no call light active. But she paused outside the door anyway, because something made her pause. A sound. Not a scream, not yet. It was a kind of low, controlled breathing that Rachel recognized from her trauma years. The specific sound of someone managing severe pain through pure force of will. The sound of someone who has been told to stop making noise about something that is absolutely real. Rachel stood outside that door for 40 seconds. Then she moved on. At midnight, she was at the nurse's station making her notes when she heard it. The scream from 517 was not like the kind of sound she was prepared for. It was sharp and specific, and laden with a particular quality that experienced nurses learn to calibrate. This was not fear, not nightmare, not the confused cry of someone waking disoriented in a strange room. This was a person in genuine, acute, physical pain. Rachel was on her feet before the sound finished. She was in the hallway before the echo of it died. She hit the door of 517 at a run and pushed it open. Lila Montgomery was sitting upright in her bed, both hands pressed flat against the sides of her head, her face contorted. She was 21 years old. In the patient photo attached to her chart, she had looked like what she was, the kind of beautiful, composed young woman who had grown up in a house with portraits and dress uniforms, and a father who expected a certain kind of posture at all times. Right now, she looked like someone who had been pushed to the edge of what a human being can withstand. "Hey," Rachel said, crossing to the bed. "I'm here. I'm Nurse Pierce. Talk to me. What is happening right now?" Lila's eyes found her. There was something in them that wasn't just pain. It was desperation. The specific desperation of someone who has been disbelieved so many times they've stopped expecting to be heard. "It's the pillow," she said, her voice cracking. "Every time I put my head down, every single time, it feels like there are needles going into my skull." Rachel reached for her wrist to check her pulse. It was elevated significantly. "How long has this been going on tonight?" "Since I tried to sleep at 10, I've been sitting up. But I fell asleep and my head went down and..." She broke off, pressing her hands harder against her temples. "They keep telling me it's in my head. They keep telling me it's grief. My father isn't dead. He's deployed. I'm not grieving. I know the difference between grief and something physically hurting me." "I hear you," Rachel said, and she meant it. Not as a therapeutic phrase, not as trained de-escalation. She meant it as a statement of fact. "I hear what you're saying." Dr. Voss told the night nurse last week that if I kept complaining, he was going to have me transferred to the psychiatric unit. Lila's voice dropped. "He said it in front of me, like I wasn't even there, like I was already decided." Rachel looked at the pillow. It was a standard hospital pillow in a white case, appearing entirely unremarkable, sitting at the head of the bed where Lila had pushed it away from herself. Something Rachel could not have fully articulated made her keep looking at it. In 11 years, she had seen patients describe impossible things. She had also, in 11 years, learned that when a patient with no psychiatric history, no history of somatization, no secondary gain from their illness, describes a specific, localized positional pain consistently over 12 days, and every objective test comes back negative, there are two possibilities. Either the testing methodology is wrong, or the cause is something that hasn't been tested for. "When did the pain start?" Rachel asked. Not in the hospital. Before. When did it start? Lila thought about this. The second night I was here. The first night was fine. They moved me to this room on the second day, and that second night was when it started. You were in a different room the first night? They moved me here because this room is larger. My father's aide arranged it. He said my father wanted me to be comfortable. Something changed in Lila's expression when she said this. A kind of uncertainty. He arranged everything. The admission, the room assignment. He handled all of it because my father was already overseas and couldn't be reached. What is your father's aide's name? Lila looked at her steadily. Why are you asking me that? Rachel realized she had said too much, moved too fast. She hadn't meant to say it at all. I'm just gathering context. Standard intake. I should have reviewed it before I came in. She pivoted. Is there a position where you're comfortable right now? Sitting up. As long as I don't put my head down, I'm okay. Then let's keep you sitting up. Do you want me to get you some additional support for your back? Lila looked at her with an expression that was almost funny under the circumstances. A flash of something like incredulity. You're the first person who has asked me that in 12 days. Rachel got her settled. She adjusted the angle of the bed, brought a second pillow for Lila's back, a different pillow from the supply closet, and stayed for 20 minutes until Lila's pulse rate had dropped and her breathing had steadied. She did not page Dr. Voss. She documented the incident as a pain episode, patient responsive and calmed, vital signs normalized, patient currently comfortable in upright position. At 12:40, she went back to the nurse's station and sat down with the chart again. This time she was looking for something specific. She pulled up the room assignment records, which were not in the patient chart, but in the administrative section of the system, which she technically had access to as a staff nurse, but which most nurses on the night shift never looked at because there was no reason to. She found the record for Lila Montgomery's room reassignment. It had been processed on October 2nd, the morning of her second day, by a user ID she didn't recognize. She wrote the user ID down on a post-it note and stuck it in her pocket. At 1:15, Donna appeared at the station and looked at Rachel with the particular expression she reserved for people who were doing something she hadn't sanctioned. You went into 517. She was screaming. You were supposed to page Dr. Voss. By the time I paged and waited for a callback, she would have been screaming for another 15 minutes. I assessed, I stabilized, I documented. The patient is comfortable. Donna looked at the chart. She looked at Rachel. She picked up the chart and read the note Rachel had written. Then she put it back down and said, Dr. Voss is going to want to know you went in there. He can know, Rachel said. I went in there. There was a long pause. Donna said quietly, I'd be careful if I were you. This is not a case where people are being rewarded for initiative. Rachel looked at her. Has someone specifically told you that? But Donna had already turned away, and the conversation was over. The next hour was quiet. Rachel did her 2 o'clock checks, updated her documentation, and tried to concentrate on the ordinary work of the night shift. But her mind kept circling back to the pillow, specifically to the thing Lila had said. Every time I put my head down, it's like needles. Not generalized head pain. Not the diffuse, migrating, emotionally amplified pain that characterized somatic disorders. Needle pain, localized, positional, only when lying down, worse in direct contact with the pillow surface. She thought about what could cause that. She thought about every physical explanation she could construct. She thought about what she had seen and what she had not seen, and what a doctor who was motivated to find nothing would not have looked for. At 2:37, she got up from the nurse's station and walked back down the east corridor. She stood outside 517. She listened. The particular controlled breathing she had heard at 11 was back, which meant Lila was awake and managing. Not in acute crisis, but not comfortable. Rachel pushed the door open quietly. Lila looked up. There was no surprise in her face. She had been expecting someone to come back, Rachel thought, but not necessarily in a good way. She had been expecting the kind of return that came with a different agenda. "Can't sleep," Rachel said. "Can't sleep," Lila confirmed. Rachel walked to the chair beside the bed and sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rachel said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, even if it sounds like I'm asking something strange." Lila's chin came up slightly, a very precise movement, something learned. The daughter of a man who had spent 30 years in the Navy, Rachel thought, she had probably learned early to hold herself together when things got strange. "Ask. Has anyone been in your room when you weren't here? Has anything in your room been moved or changed or, I don't know how to make this sound reasonable, has anything felt wrong to you about the physical space? Not your pain, the room itself." The silence that followed lasted longer than Rachel expected. "My father's aide," Lila said finally, "Commander Deke. He came the second morning and brought me things. Books. He said my father had asked him to bring them. He said he'd made sure everything in the room was right." She paused. "He spent about 10 minutes in here while I was in imaging. When I came back, he was just leaving. He said he'd fix the pillow because the housekeeping staff had done it wrong." Another pause, longer. "I didn't think anything of it at the time." Rachel felt something settle into place in her chest. Not certainty, not yet, but the shape of something that was becoming certainty. Which imaging was that? The second MRI, October 2nd, late morning. October 2nd, the same day the room reassignment had been processed, the same day the pain had started. Rachel stood up. She crossed to the bed and looked at the pillow that was still pushed to one side, the one Lila had been sleeping on for 12 days. She reached out and picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. "What are you doing?" Lila asked. Her voice had gone very quiet. "I need to examine this," Rachel said. "I think something may be inside it." She pressed her hands along the surface, working methodically from the edges inward. The outer case felt normal. The foam beneath felt normal in most places. But in a band across the upper third of the pillow, the part that would rest at the back of the skull when a person lay down, there was something different. Under her pressing fingers, she could feel them. Small, hard, distinct. Multiple points. Spaced with an interval that was not random. Deliberately arranged. She looked at Lila. Lila was looking back at her with an expression Rachel would never forget for the rest of her life. It was the expression of a person who had been told they were imagining something. Told it over and over by people with authority and credentials, and institutional weight behind them, and who was now watching someone find the proof that they weren't. It was not relief. It was something more complicated than relief. It was the specific, exhausting, devastating vindication of someone who knew they were right, but had almost stopped believing their own knowledge. "There is something in this pillow," Rachel said. "I can feel it through the casing." Lila made a sound that was not quite a word. Rachel's hands were still on the pillow. Her mind was moving very fast now, cataloging, calculating. She needed to document this. She needed a witness. She needed the pillow preserved as evidence, which meant she needed to not do anything that would compromise whatever was inside it before she had someone else in the room. But she also needed to know. Right now, in this moment, she needed to know what was in it, because if she was wrong, she was about to step off a professional ledge from which there was no coming back. And if she was right, every second mattered. "Who else is on the floor right now?" Lila asked. "Donna at the station. 2 other nurses on the far end of the floor." Rachel set the pillow down on the bedside tray table and pulled her phone from her pocket. She needed to think clearly. She needed to not do the next thing wrong. Donna would tell her to call Dr. Voss. Dr. Voss had been managing this case from the beginning and had reached a conclusion that Rachel was now in the process of proving was a lie or a blind spot or something worse than either. If she called Donna, Donna would call Voss, and if there was anything intentional about what was in that pillow, the first person who would be notified would be the person most motivated to make the evidence disappear. She didn't call Donna. She called the hospital's on-call administrator, a night duty supervisor named Gerald Hicks, who she had spoken to exactly twice in 6 years, and who picked up on the third ring, sounding annoyed and half asleep. "Hicks, what is it?" "This is Nurse Rachel Pierce. I'm on the East Corridor, 5th floor. I have a patient reporting severe, consistent, positional head pain with a negative full neurological workup. I have reason to believe there is a foreign object inside her pillow. I need a witness, and I need to document this before I examine it further. I need you here." A pause. "A foreign object in the pillow?" "Yes." "Rachel, it's nearly 3 in the morning, and this patient is a documented psych—" "I am telling you that I can feel it through the casing with my hands," Rachel said. Her voice was completely level. "I am asking you to come to room 517 and witness what I find. If I'm wrong, I will submit to any professional consequence you consider appropriate. If I'm right, you will be very glad you came." Another pause, longer. "Give me 5 minutes." She put the phone in her pocket and turned to Lila, who had been listening to every word. "He's coming." Lila nodded. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was very still in the way that a person is still when they're holding something enormous in place. "What do you think is in it?" Rachel looked at the pillow on the tray table. "I think someone put something inside it that was designed to cause exactly the pain you've been experiencing. I think it was put there deliberately, and I think whoever did it was counting on nobody looking." "Why?" Lila's voice broke on the word, just slightly. "Why would someone do that to me?" Rachel looked at her. "I don't know yet, but I think it has to do with your father." The room was quiet for 30 seconds. Then Lila said, "Commander Deke has been my father's aide for 3 years. My father trusts him completely." She stopped. "My father trusted him. Does your father have enemies?" Something moved through Lila's expression. Not surprise, but recognition. The look of someone confronting something they had been trying not to think about. "My father is a man with significant operational authority in 3 active theaters. He has made decisions that have made certain people very, very unhappy. Whether that translates into—" She stopped again. "He's been receiving threats. For the past 6 months, he told me not to worry." Rachel heard footsteps in the hall. She turned to face the door. Gerald Hicks was not a tall man or an imposing one. He was in his 50s with a rumpled look and the air of someone who had been comfortable before being interrupted. But when he came through the door and looked from Rachel to Lila to the pillow on the tray table, something shifted in his face. A kind of recalibration. He was older than he looked in the fluorescent light, Rachel thought, and he had done this job long enough to know the difference between a nurse who was covering herself and a nurse who was telling the truth. "Okay," he said. He pulled out his phone. "I'm going to record this. What are we looking at?" Rachel picked up the pillow. "I need something to open this with." Hicks looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small pocket knife. He held it out. "I carry it for the packaging tape on the supply boxes. I've had it for 15 years. Rachel took it. She looked at Lila once, and Lila gave a single, deliberate nod. Then Rachel opened the pocket knife and cut along the seam of the pillowcase, careful and precise, and folded the casing back to expose the foam beneath. What she found stopped her breath. Not because she hadn't been expecting something. She had been expecting something. But expectation doesn't prepare you for the actual reality of looking at a thing that someone built for the specific purpose of causing a young woman pain every night after night, in a hospital where she was supposed to be safe. 9 nails, rusted, roughly 2 inches long, embedded at measured intervals across the upper third of the foam, angled with the points up, positioned at the exact placement where a sleeping person's skull would apply the most pressure. They were set deep enough that no visual inspection of the intact pillow would have revealed them. Not a casual job. This had been thought about. This had been planned. Hicks stopped recording for a second and then started again. His voice when he spoke had lost all of its annoyed administrator quality. "I need to call security," he said, "and I need to call someone else." "Yes," Rachel said. She was still looking at the nails. "You do." From the bed, Lila Montgomery said nothing at all. She looked at the 9 rusted nails laid out in her pillow, and she made no sound. But her hands, folded in her lap, were shaking. Outside the door, somewhere down the east corridor, Rachel heard footsteps. Quick ones. The kind of quick that wasn't routine. The kind of quick that suggested someone had already been told what was happening in room 517 and wasn't happy about it. She took the pillow off the tray table and held it against her chest. She did not know in that moment exactly what the next hour would bring. She did not know who had sent Commander Deke to that room, or what they wanted from Admiral Montgomery, or how deeply into St. Mary's Memorial this thing went. But she knew this. The pillow was in her hands now, and it was staying there. And whoever had been counting on nobody looking was about to find out what happened when somebody finally did. 3:04 a.m., Gerald Hicks was already on his phone before Rachel finished the sentence. She could hear him talking in the low, clipped way of a man who understood that what he was looking at had just changed the entire shape of his night, possibly his career, possibly more than that. He stood near the door with his back half turned, and Rachel could only catch fragments. "Compromised. 5th floor east. I need someone up here right now." But the fragments were enough. Lila had not moved from the bed. She was watching the pillow in Rachel's hands with an expression that had gone very still, the way a person goes still when the ground has shifted under them, and they're waiting to find out if it will shift again. Her hands had stopped shaking. That was either a good sign or the kind of calm that comes after shock has completed its first pass. Rachel set the pillow on the tray table and kept her hand on it. She was not going to let it out of her sight. She was not going to let it be touched by anyone she did not fully trust. And right now, her list of people she fully trusted in this building was exactly one person long: herself. "Someone called him," Lila said quietly. Rachel looked at her. "What?" "When Hicks called security just now, 30 seconds later I heard footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside this door and then moved away." Lila's voice was completely controlled. "Someone on this floor already knows what's happening in here." Rachel turned to face the door. The hallway through the small window in the upper panel was empty. But Lila was right. She had heard those footsteps too, and she had filed them and moved on, and she should not have moved on. She crossed to the door and opened it. The east corridor was empty in both directions. At the far end, the nurse's station was lit. Donna's chair was empty. Donna's chair was never empty. Rachel stood in the doorway for 2 seconds. Then she turned back into the room. "Hicks," she said. He turned from his phone call. "Donna Briggs is not at the station. I need you to note that in whatever you're documenting right now." Hicks looked at her, then looked past her at the empty station visible through the door, and said into the phone, "Note the time, 3:06 a.m. East Corridor charge nurse is not at station." He paused. "Yes, I'll hold." He lowered the phone and looked at Rachel. "Security is 3 minutes out. Who else did you call?" "Hospital legal and the duty administrator." "Did you call Dr. Voss?" A pause that was 1 beat too long. "He's the attending on this case." "He is," Rachel said. "Did you call him?" Hicks met her eyes. "Not yet." "Good. Don't. Not until security has logged this evidence and it is out of this room and in a documented chain of custody." She paused. "I need you to understand something. If this was done to this patient intentionally, then someone with access to this room on October 2nd put it here. That means someone with hospital access, someone who knew this patient's imaging schedule, and someone who has had 12 days to watch her suffer while the medical staff assigned to her case documented it as psychiatric. That is not a small thing. That is someone inside this building." Hicks was quiet for a moment. "You're talking about a criminal act." "I'm talking about torture," Rachel said. "That's what this is. Someone tortured a 21-year-old girl in a hospital bed, every night for 12 days, and made sure she couldn't get anyone to believe her. The word landed in the room. Lila closed her eyes briefly, opened them again. Hicks said, "I'm going to need a formal statement from you." "You'll have one," Rachel looked at Lila. And from her, 3:09 a.m. The security guard who arrived first was a man named Torres. Compact, late 30s, with the particular body language of someone who had spent time in uniform before this job. He took one look at the pillow on the tray table, and his expression shifted in exactly the way Rachel had needed it to shift. Not dismissive, not skeptical, alert. "Nobody touches it," Rachel said. "Understood." He pulled out his radio. "I need to call this in as a potential crime scene. This floor needs to be locked down. There's a charge nurse who was at station at 3 a.m. and is now unaccounted for," Rachel added. "Her name is Donna Briggs." Torres relayed this into the radio without blinking. He was the right person to have walk through that door, Rachel thought. He had the right instincts. Lila spoke from the bed, her voice carefully measured. "What does locking down the floor mean for me?" "It means nobody comes in or out of this room without clearance," Torres said, "which means you're safer in the next 10 minutes than you've been in the last 12 days. Something moved across Lila's face at that. Not quite relief, more like the specific, wrenching emotion of being told something you should have been told 2 weeks ago. "I want to call my father," she said. "We'll get you to a secure phone," Torres said, "as soon as the scene is documented." 3:14 a.m. The second security officer arrived with a camera, which meant Hicks had used the right language on the phone. This was being treated as evidence documentation from the start, not as a routine incident report that could be revised or buried. Rachel watched the officer photograph the pillow from 4 angles before anyone moved it, and she felt something in her chest ease slightly. The smallest fraction of slightly, because the pillow was being documented, but Donna was still missing, and whoever had sent those footsteps down the hallway already knew that the pillow had been found. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number, text message. 4 words. "Put it back, Rachel." Her hand tightened on the phone. She looked at Torres. "Someone just sent me a text from an unknown number telling me to put the pillow back." Torres crossed to her in 2 steps. He read the message. His jaw set. "Give me the phone. I need to log this." He pulled an evidence bag from his belt. He had come prepared, which meant this had been escalated higher than she realized in the 3 minutes between Hicks's phone call and Torres's arrival. "You'll get it back. Do you have another way to communicate?" "I can use the room phone." She handed him the phone without hesitation. Torres bagged it and turned to the second officer. "Get the floor camera footage from the nurse's station pulled right now. Last 30 minutes. He looked at Rachel. "Who has your personal cell number in this building?" Rachel thought about it. "Most of the nursing staff. HR has it on file. Scheduling." She paused. "Administration. So anyone with access to staff records?" "Yes." "Including Dr. Voss?" She looked at him steadily. "Attending physicians have access to the contact information of the nursing staff on their assigned cases." "Yes, including Dr. Voss." Torres wrote something down. He did not say anything else about it. He didn't have to. 3:19 a.m. Donna Briggs walked back onto the floor at 3:19, and when she saw the 2 security officers, the camera, Gerald Hicks against the wall with his arms crossed, and Rachel standing in the doorway of room 517, she stopped walking. The stop lasted less than a second. She recovered quickly, smoothed it over with a professional blankness that Rachel recognized as a mask over something that was moving very fast underneath. She had worked nights at St. Mary's for 22 years. She knew how to compose herself. But Rachel had been watching people manage crisis situations for 11 years, and she had learned something about that particular fraction of a second when a person encounters something they were not expecting to encounter. Donna had known, or she had suspected, or she had been told. One of those 3 things, and the fractional stop had been the tell. "What's happening?" Donna asked. She directed the question at Hicks, which was the right professional move. He outranked her. But her eyes cut to Rachel for just a moment before they settled. "We have a patient safety situation," Hicks said. "I need to know where you've been for the last 15 minutes. "I took a break. I do at 3 a.m. It's on the schedule." "Where specifically?" "A beat. Stairwell on the north end. I walk sometimes to stay awake on the late shift." Torres said, "I'll need to verify that with the stairwell camera footage. Standard procedure for a lockdown." Donna looked at him. "Lockdown?" "Fifth floor east is temporarily secured," Torres said. "We're documenting a potential crime. I need everyone who was on this floor tonight to stay available for questioning." "A crime?" Donna's voice had gone very flat. "In room 517. "Donna," Rachel said. She said it quietly, not as a challenge, just her name, and Donna turned to look at her. And for just a moment, the professional blankness cracked, and underneath it was something Rachel had not expected. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. Something that looked almost like fear. "You were told not to go in there," Donna said. "I told you specifically." "You did," Rachel agreed. She was screaming. "The protocol was to call Dr. Voss." "I know what the protocol was." Rachel held Donna's gaze. "Were you told to tell me that, or did you decide that yourself?" Donna said nothing. The nothing was an answer. "Who told you?" Rachel asked, softly, not aggressive. She genuinely wanted to know. Torres stepped between them. "We can continue this in the formal interview. Right now, I need both of you to write a timeline of your movements tonight, starting at 10 p.m. Separate locations. Ms. Briggs, you're with Officer Chen." Donna looked at Rachel one more time. The fear was still there. "I have worked in this hospital for 22 years, she said. The sentence had no clear ending. She didn't seem to know where she'd been going with it. She turned and followed Officer Chen down the corridor. Rachel watched her go and felt, not triumph, not vindication, but a deep and specific sadness. Donna had known something. Maybe not everything, maybe just enough to be afraid. And whatever she had known, she had chosen the wrong side of it. And now the 22 years were in serious jeopardy. And the worst part was that Rachel understood exactly how it happened. You work long enough inside a system, and the system starts to feel like the safest thing in the room, even when the system is protecting something wrong. 3:27 a.m. Lila had been quiet through all of it. When Rachel came back into the room and closed the door, she found her sitting exactly as she had been, upright, hands folded, watching. But her color was better. Pain is exhausting, and the particular exhaustion of pain that has been disbelieved is a specific kind of drain. And something in Lila's face had released slightly, the way a muscle releases after holding tension for too long. "The stairwell on the north end," Lila said. "What about it?" "There's no camera coverage on the north stairwell between floors 4 and 6. It's been a maintenance issue for 8 months. It was raised at a staff meeting my father's aide attended." She paused. "He toured the facility in August. I remember because my father mentioned it. He said Deke had checked the hospital over to make sure it was secure." Rachel sat down in the chair beside the bed. "Deke checked the hospital. For security. He told my father it was secure. He reported back that everything was fine." Lila's voice had taken on a careful, measured quality. The voice of someone laying out pieces of evidence as they understand them. Not rushing, making sure each piece is in the right place before moving to the next. He knew which areas weren't covered. "He gave himself the map," Rachel said. "He gave himself the map," Lila repeated. "And then 3 months later, I end up here." She stopped. "Do you know what my father is working on? What his current assignment is?" "I don't." "Neither do I, completely. He doesn't discuss operational details, but he told me before he left. He told me it was significant. He said that when it was complete, it would be the most important thing he'd done in 30 years of service. He said some people were going to be very angry when it happened. She met Rachel's eyes. He deployed 2 weeks before I was admitted here. You were admitted 2 weeks after he deployed? Yes. Rachel was quiet for a moment. The shape of the thing was becoming clearer, and the clearer it became, the larger it was. Someone wanted leverage over your father. Something that would make him stop what he was doing, or change what he was doing, or disappear from what he was doing. And the leverage was you. Yes, Lila said. I think that's it. I think that is exactly it. Her composure held. Just barely, but it held. I think Commander Deke has been reporting to someone else for at least 8 months, maybe longer. And I was the tool. Have you told anyone else this? I tried to tell Dr. Voss on day 4. I told him I thought my pain was connected to something involving my father. He wrote in my chart that I was experiencing paranoid ideation secondary to anxiety disorder. She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than bitterness. He was very calm about it. He told me that it was common for patients under stress to construct external explanations for internal distress. He used those exact words, internal distress. Rachel thought about Voss standing outside this room at 3 a.m., laughing under his breath at the sound of Lila's screaming, texting someone she's still holding. The picture was nearly complete now. Voss was not acting alone. He was part of the system that Commander Deke had built, or bought, or coerced into place. The system that would ensure Lila suffered in a medically documented, credibly explained way that would reach her father and deliver the message, "We have your daughter, and the people around her are ours, and there is nothing you can do." Your father doesn't know the details of what's been happening to you? Rachel asked. His aide manages all communication, all of it. My father is in a location with restricted contact. Deke is his conduit. Her voice tightened fractionally on the word. Deke controls what my father hears. So he could be hearing a version of this that's designed to pressure him without it being traceable. Yes, or hearing nothing, or hearing that I'm psychiatric and being managed and there's nothing to worry about. She took a breath. He trusted Deke, completely. That's what's hardest to sit with. Rachel heard the door open behind her. Torres leaned in. The NCIS duty officer is on the line. They want to speak with the patient. He looked at Lila. Are you willing? Lila straightened in the bed. It was a small movement, but it meant something. A gathering, a decision. Yes, she said. Absolutely yes. 3:41 a.m. The conversation with NCIS lasted 11 minutes. Rachel heard only Lila's side of it, but the side she heard was precise, organized, and completely without the wavering or hedging that 12 days of medical gaslighting could have produced in someone with less iron in them. She gave dates, names, observations. She described Commander Deke's visit. She described the exact words Dr. Voss had used when she raised the possibility of an external cause. She described the pillow and what Rachel had found, and the sequence of events from 10 p.m. through this moment. When she finished, she handed the phone back to Torres and looked at Rachel. They're sending 2 agents. They should be here within the hour. Okay, Rachel said. They asked me if I had any documentation of my communications with Commander Deke. Texts, emails. She reached past Rachel to the small drawer in her bedside table and pulled out her personal phone. Not the room phone, her own phone, which no one had apparently thought to confiscate. I have everything, every text since September. I didn't delete them because he's my father's aide, and I didn't think I needed to. A pause. Or maybe I kept them because something always felt not right, and I didn't know what to do with that feeling, so I just kept everything. She held the phone out. Rachel looked at it. The last text from the contact listed as Commander Deke was from 11 days ago. The message said, "Your father wants you to focus on recovery. Trust the doctors. Don't make things complicated. Don't make things complicated." Sent to a girl who had nails in her pillow. Rachel looked up from the phone and met Lila's eyes and didn't say anything. There was nothing adequate to say. 3:53 a.m. The knock on the door was not Torres. It was not Hicks. It was three sharp, unhurried knocks. The kind of knock that assumes it will be answered and is not in a particular hurry about it. Rachel crossed to the door. She opened it. Dr. Harlan Voss stood in the hallway in his full attending physician presentation. The coat, the badge, the expression of calm professional authority that she had seen in the chart and had been building a picture of for the last 2 hours. He was in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, with the look of a man who had been right about things for a long time and had stopped being uncertain about whether he was right. He looked at Rachel, then past her, briefly, at Lila in the bed, then back at Rachel. "Nurse Pierce," he said, "I think we should talk." "The floor is locked down," Rachel said. "You need to speak with security about access." "I'm the attending on this case. I have full access." "Not tonight, you don't." Torres appeared from the direction of the nurse's station, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. "Dr. Voss, I'm going to need you to come with me." Something shifted in Voss's face. Not panic. He was too controlled for panic. But something recalibrated behind his eyes. The rapid, invisible computation of a man who has just realized that the thing he thought was contained is no longer contained. "This is completely irregular," he said. "Yes." Voss turned and walked with Torres down the east corridor. Rachel stood in the doorway and watched him until he was out of sight. Then she stepped back inside room 517 and closed the door. "He came himself," Lila said. She had seen all of it. "He didn't send anyone. He came himself." "He wanted to see how far it had gone," Rachel said, "and now he knows." "And now he knows." Rachel pulled the chair back to the bedside and sat down. Her legs, she realized, had been carrying her on adrenaline for the past hour and were now communicating their objections. She let herself feel tired for exactly 3 seconds. Then she pushed it back. "NCIS is an hour out. Torres has the pillow. Your phone is logged. 2 witnesses have documented the discovery and the sequence of events. You're safe right now." Lila looked at her for a long moment. "You could have called Voss when I started screaming. That was what you were told to do." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Rachel thought about how to answer that. She thought about the 40 seconds she had stood outside this door at 11 p.m., listening to a young woman manage unbearable pain in silence because she had been told her pain wasn't real. She thought about 11 years of night shifts and patients whose names she barely remembered now. She thought about what it meant to be the person in the hallway who stops. "Because you were telling the truth," she said, "and I knew it." Lila looked at her for another long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Thank you." Outside in the corridor, somewhere in the direction of the nurse's station, Rachel heard voices. New voices. More of them. The particular tone of arrival that meant the situation had moved to another level. And underneath the voices, somewhere further away, she heard the sound of a door closing with a finality that suggested someone had just run out of options. 4:02 a.m. The 2 NCIS agents did not look like what Rachel had expected. She had expected suits, federal energy, the particular brand of authority that announces itself. What walked through the door of St. Mary's Memorial at 4:02 a.m. was a woman in her early 40s named Special Agent Dana Kerrigan, in jeans and a gray jacket with her badge clipped to her belt, and a younger man introduced only as Agent Solis, who had the quiet, watchful quality of someone who was absorbing everything and filing it in a place where it would stay. They had made the drive in under 40 minutes, which meant they had not wasted a single second after Torres's call, which meant someone in the NCIS chain had already known that the name Montgomery on a patient file at St. Mary's Memorial was not a routine matter. Kerrigan shook Rachel's hand first. Her grip was direct and unhurried. "You're the nurse who found it?" "Yes." "Walk me through it from the beginning. Don't skip anything because it seems small." Rachel walked her through it. All of it, from Donna's instructions at 10:15 to the text message on her confiscated phone. Kerrigan listened without interrupting, without writing anything down, which Rachel initially found unsettling until she realized that Solis was recording everything on a small device clipped to his collar, and Kerrigan was doing what good listeners do. She was watching Rachel's face, tracking the small, involuntary signals that separate someone telling a story they've constructed from someone telling something they lived through. When Rachel finished, Kerrigan said, "The text. Put it back, Rachel. It used your first name." "Yes." "Not Nurse Pierce, Rachel." "Yes. That's someone who knows you, not just your number, your name. Someone who thinks of you by your first name." Kerrigan looked at Solis briefly. "Pull the staff roster. Everyone on this floor tonight and everyone with scheduled access to Rachel Pierce's contact information." She looked back at Rachel. "Did anything strike you about Donna Briggs's reaction when she came back to the floor?" Rachel thought carefully. This was the part she had been turning over since 3:19. "She was afraid," she said. "Not guilty in the way I expected. Not caught. Afraid. Like someone who had been told something would be contained and was now watching it not be contained." "She was a buffer," Kerrigan said. "Not the source. Someone positioned her to manage access to this patient without her necessarily understanding the full picture." She paused. "That's how this kind of operation works. You build layers. The person closest to the evidence has the least information. That way, if it unravels, they take the first impact and the source has time." Rachel absorbed this. "Voss." "We'll get to Voss." Kerrigan checked her watch. "I want to speak with the patient." 4:11 a.m. Lila had composed herself in the 40 minutes since Torres had walked Voss down the corridor. She was sitting upright, her hands in her lap, and she looked like the kind of young woman who had grown up watching her father receive bad news across a desk and had learned that stillness was not weakness, it was strategy. Kerrigan sat down across from her and for a moment said nothing, just looked at her with a directness that was not aggressive but was absolutely honest. "I'm going to ask you some hard questions," she said finally, "and I want you to know before I ask them that I have seen the pillow. I have read Torres's documentation, and I believe you. I believed you before I walked into this room. I just need you to help me build the case that will make the right people pay for what was done to you." Lila took a breath. "Ask. Your father, when he was last in contact with you directly, not through Deke, not through a message delivered by Deke, when was the last time you heard his actual voice?" Lila thought about it. "September 28th. He called me directly from a secure line. He said he was going into a phase of the assignment where communication would be restricted and that Deke would handle everything. He told me to trust Deke." She stopped. "He said, trust Deke the way you trust me." Those were his exact words. And after that, all communication came through Deke. Every piece of it. "Did your father know you had been admitted here?" "Deke told me he informed my father. He showed me a message." What he said was a message from my father, saying that my father was aware and that I should follow the doctor's recommendations and not worry about him. "He showed you a message?" "On his phone. A text." Lila's jaw tightened slightly. "I didn't question it. I was in pain and I was frightened, and it was my father's number." "Numbers can be spoofed," Kerrigan said quietly, not cruelly, just factually. "And someone who manages a senior officer's communication access, who knows his contact protocols, who has been inside the operational structure for 3 years, that person would know exactly how to send a message that looked like it came from your father without it coming from him at all." The silence in the room lasted 4 full seconds. Rachel, standing near the door, watched Lila process this, watched her absorb the specific blow of understanding that the last thing she thought she had from her father, his voice telling her to trust the man who had put nails in her pillow, might have been fabricated. "He may not know I'm here," Lila said. He may not know you're here, Kerrigan confirmed. Then what does he know? If Deke controls the communication, she stopped, started again. If my father is the leverage point, if making him change his operational decisions is the goal, then what is Deke telling him? What message is he receiving about me? Kerrigan looked at her steadily. We don't know yet, but we're going to find out. 4:19 a.m., the twist came from Solis, who had been on his laptop in the corridor for 20 minutes and appeared in the doorway of room 517 with an expression that Rachel had come to read in the past 2 hours as his version of urgency. He kept everything contained, this man, but something in the set of his shoulders said that what he had found was significant. Kerrigan, you need to see this. Kerrigan stepped into the corridor. Rachel followed without asking permission, and Kerrigan did not tell her to stay behind. Solis turned the laptop screen. Harlan Voss. He's been the attending on 3 previous cases in this hospital in the last 4 years. All 3 patients were family members of active senior military personnel. All 3 were admitted with subjective pain complaints. All 3 received psychiatric diagnoses after full negative workups. All 3 were discharged within 3 weeks. He paused. 2 of the 3 involved personnel who subsequently withdrew from sensitive assignments within 60 days of the patient's admission. Rachel heard herself say, "This is not the first time." "This is not the first time," Solis confirmed. Voss has done this before. Different patients, different family members, different operational contexts. But the pattern is identical. Admission, negative workup, psychiatric diagnosis, sustained suffering, pressure on the target through the patient, operational withdrawal. He looked at Kerrigan. He is not a doctor who is in over his head. He is a mechanism. He has been doing this systematically for at least 4 years. Kerrigan was very still. The other 2 patients, where are they now? One is in an outpatient psychiatric program in Maryland. One moved to her sister's house in Ohio after discharge. Neither filed a complaint about their treatment. He paused. Both signed release of liability documents before discharge. Rachel thought about what it would take to get a young woman, discharged after weeks of documented psychiatric care, to sign a release of liability before she left. You would need her to believe that what had happened to her was her own failure of mental health. You would need her so worn down that a document releasing the hospital from responsibility felt like simply closing a door and walking away. You would need 12 days of being told your pain wasn't real to have done its work completely. They didn't know, Rachel said. When they left, they still thought they were the problem. They still think they're the problem, Solis said. Right now, tonight, 4:28 a.m. When they told Lila she didn't cry, she sat with it for a moment in the particular way she had of sitting with difficult things, receiving them, holding them, deciding what to do with them. And then she said, I want their names. I want to contact them. When this is over, I want them to know that it wasn't them, that they weren't crazy. Kerrigan looked at her, and something in the agent's face shifted almost imperceptibly toward what Rachel could only describe as respect. When this is over, she said, we'll make sure of that. I want it in writing. A beat, then Kerrigan said, I'll put it in writing. Rachel looked at this 21-year-old girl who had been tortured for 12 consecutive nights and was, at 4:28 in the morning, already thinking about the other women who had been through the same machine before her, and she felt something she hadn't felt clearly in a very long time. Something that had been worn down by 6 years of night shifts and being part-time and being unnoticed. She felt proud, not of herself, of Lila, profoundly, unconditionally proud of who this young woman was under pressure. 4:35 a.m., Torres came in with a development that changed the temperature of the room immediately. His radio had been going for 10 minutes, low exchanges that Rachel hadn't been able to decode, and when he came through the door, his face was carrying something new. Voss asked to use the restroom, he said. Officer Chen escorted him. He requested privacy. Chen waited outside the stall. He paused. When Chen went in after 4 minutes, Voss was on a burner phone. Chen took the phone. Voss had sent one message before it was confiscated. Kerrigan said, "What was the message?" 3 words, "Package is open." The room went quiet. Package is open. Not a cry for help, not a panicked explanation. A report delivered to someone who would understand immediately what those 3 words meant, who would know that the pillow had been found, that the operation had been exposed, and who would begin doing whatever they needed to do in response. "Who did he send it to?" Kerrigan asked. "Number is a burner. We're running it." Torres looked at Lila. "Is the name Hargrove meaningful to you? In relation to your father's work, to Commander Deke, to anyone connected to your father?" Lila's reaction was small but unmistakable. A fractional stillness, the kind that happens when a name connects to something already in memory. "Admiral Hargrove," she said quietly. "He and my father have been in professional conflict for 2 years. My father believes Hargrove has been directing intelligence assets in ways that are unauthorized. He told me he was building a case. He said it would take down someone very senior." She stopped. "He said it would make someone very senior very angry." Kerrigan turned to Solis. Not a word, just a look. Solis was already on the phone. 4:44 a.m. The next 8 minutes were the fastest of the night. Kerrigan made 3 calls in rapid succession, her voice dropping below what Rachel could hear, each call shorter and more clipped than the last. Solis closed his laptop and moved to the door in a way that suggested he was setting a perimeter in his mind and deciding where to stand inside it. Torres's radio went active with a new frequency that meant whatever was happening was no longer just a 5th-floor lockdown at St. Mary's Memorial. It had transferred to a different level of urgency, a federal level, the kind where the scope expands so fast that the original crime scene becomes almost a footnote to what it unlocked. Lila watched all of this from her bed. She watched it with the composed attention of someone who had been raised in proximity to this world, the world of operations and protocols, and people who communicate in codes of expression rather than words. And she tracked each movement and each call and each shift in the room's energy with steady eyes. Rachel stayed at her side. She didn't know exactly where she fit in what was now happening. She was a part-time nurse on a night shift who had found something in a pillow and had not let go of it. Whatever this had become, and it had become something significantly larger than a hospital crime scene, she had played her part in setting it in motion. Now the motion had its own momentum. At 4:52, Kerrigan came back into the room and sat down. "Here is what I can tell you right now," she said to Lila. "We have Voss in custody. We have the burner phone. We have the text, and we have the recipient number, and within the hour, we will have the source of that number, which we believe connects to a network that goes well above Commander Deke. We have your text history with Deke. We have the pillow and the chain of custody documentation Rachel established before we arrived, which is," she paused and looked at Rachel, "some of the cleanest first responder evidence preservation I have seen from a non-law enforcement witness. That chain of custody is going to matter enormously." Rachel said nothing. She wasn't sure she could say anything at that particular moment. "What about my father?" Lila asked. "We have made contact through an independent, secure channel that bypasses the communication infrastructure Deke controls. Your father has been reached." Kerrigan's voice was careful. "He is aware that you are safe. He is aware of what was in the pillow. He is being briefed on the scope of the operation as we speak." She paused. "He is," the word the duty officer used was devastated. "He had no knowledge that you had been admitted here. He received reports through Deke that you were well, that you were staying with friends in Virginia, and that there was no cause for concern." Lila closed her eyes. When she opened them, her composure was intact, but something underneath it had shifted. Not broken, but moved, the way tectonic things move. He didn't know. He didn't know. He's been overseas for 2 weeks thinking I was fine. Yes, she was quiet for a moment. Is he safe? If Hargrove's network is as wide as it seems, your father is currently the safest he has been in 2 weeks, because the people responsible for his security now know there is an active threat that had been operating without their knowledge. The exposure of this operation has changed his protective circumstances significantly. Kerrigan leaned forward slightly. Lila, what your father has been building, the case he mentioned to you before deployment, he did not stop building it. He kept going. And because he kept going, the other side needed the pressure on him to increase. That's why tonight escalated. Not because the plan was working, because the plan was starting to fail. Rachel heard that sentence and turned it over. The plan was starting to fail, meaning Lila had been holding through the pain for 12 nights, and the pressure it was supposed to generate had not produced the result they wanted from the Admiral. And so someone, Hargrove or the people around Hargrove, had decided to increase the pressure through Voss. And instead of increasing the pressure, they had pushed hard enough to snap the mechanism and expose everything underneath it. They had gotten greedy, and in getting greedy, they had handed Rachel exactly the situation where a nurse who refused to follow protocol could pull the whole structure down. 5:03 a.m. The door opened and Torres came in with a look that Rachel had not seen on him yet. Something above urgent, something that required its own category. There's a man downstairs, he said. He arrived 6 minutes ago. He showed credentials at the entrance. He looked at Lila. He says he's your father. The sound Lila made was not a word. It was something underneath words. He's requesting access to this floor, Torres continued. NCIS is verifying his identity now. It will take 4 minutes. Kerrigan stood. She looked at Lila. Do you want to wait for verification, or do you want to go to him? Lila was already out of the bed. Her feet hit the floor, and she stood upright, and she looked steadier than she had looked at any point in the last 12 days. Steadier than pain, or sedation, or medical dismissal had left her. Because sometimes what holds a person up is not rest, or treatment, or resolution. Sometimes it's just the knowledge that the person you needed is on the other side of a door. I'll know it's him, she said. I don't need 4 minutes. Kerrigan looked at Torres. Torres stepped aside. Rachel followed them into the corridor. She stayed back because this part was not hers. She had done her part. This part belonged to someone else. She watched Lila walk down the east corridor toward the elevator with Kerrigan at her side and Torres ahead of them, and she stood outside the door of room 517 in the fluorescent silence of 5 a.m. and let herself breathe. The east corridor was very quiet. Donna Briggs was somewhere being interviewed. Voss was in custody. The pillow was in an evidence bag. The night shift was almost over. Rachel leaned against the wall and put one hand flat against the cool surface and closed her eyes for 20 seconds. When she opened them, Solis was standing a few feet away, watching her. You did good, he said. It was the most words he had strung together at one time. I did what a nurse is supposed to do, Rachel said. Nurses are supposed to follow protocol, Solis said. You followed something different. Rachel thought about this. I followed the patient, Solis nodded once. Then he said, I want to show you something. He opened his laptop and turned it toward her. On the screen was a photograph, a hospital bed in a room she didn't recognize, patient chart visible on a wall-mounted board. The chart had a name on it. This is one of the 2 previous patients, Solis said. The one in Maryland. She was 23 when she was admitted. Her father was a senior intelligence officer. She was in that bed for 16 days before she was discharged with a psychiatric diagnosis she still carries. She still sees a therapist twice a week for what she believes is an anxiety disorder. He paused. When we call her in the morning and tell her what we found in Lila Montgomery's pillow, it is going to rewrite 4 years of her life. It is going to mean that everything she has blamed herself for, every night she questioned her own sanity, every day she wondered why she couldn't be stronger, It was done to her, deliberately, by the same mechanism. Rachel looked at the photograph for a long moment. Voss did not think anyone was going to find it, Solis said. He had done it twice before, and no one looked. He was correct that no one was going to look. He did not account for a part-time nurse on a shift she wasn't supposed to be on, in a room she was told not to enter, finding 9 nails in a pillow at 3 o'clock in the morning. Rachel handed the laptop back. He was wrong about the part-time nurse, she said. 5:17 a.m. She heard it before she saw it. From somewhere near the elevator bank, a sound she recognized immediately because she had been hearing it on the wrong frequency for the past 6 hours. Lila's voice. But this time it did not have the quality of a scream or a managed breath or a careful, controlled statement to a federal agent. This time it had the quality of a person who has been handed back something they thought they had lost. And underneath it, a man's voice, low, rough with something that had nothing to do with composure, saying her name. Just her name, over and over. The way a father says a child's name when the child has been in danger and is no longer in danger, and the body hasn't caught up to that fact yet. Rachel stood in the east corridor of St. Mary's Memorial at 5:17 in the morning and listened to that sound and did not move, because some moments need to happen without anyone walking through them. The sun was not yet up. The night shift had 43 minutes left. Rachel Pierce, part-time, unnoticed, the nurse who had been exactly where she needed to be, stood against the wall of the 5th floor and let the hospital breathe around her. Outside, somewhere in the world that was beginning to wake up, things were moving that had been set in motion by 9 rusted nails in a foam pillow and a woman who refused to walk away. She did not know yet what all of it would cost her. She did not know what Voss's attorney would say, or what the hospital administration would do when the morning came and they had to account for 12 days of willful blindness, or what her own position in this building would look like when the legal machinery began to turn. She knew some of it would be hard. She knew that doing the right thing inside a broken system rarely leaves the person who did it unscathed. But right now, at 5:17 a.m., Admiral Victor Montgomery was in the hallway of St. Mary's Memorial with his arms around his daughter, and Lila Montgomery was not screaming anymore. And that was what mattered. That was what had always mattered. That was the only thing Rachel had needed to do, from the moment she stood outside room 517 and listened to a young woman breathe through pain that nobody believed was real. She had believed it. That was enough. That had always been enough. 5:44 a.m. The morning shift supervisor arrived at 5:44 and found a federal investigation on the 5th floor, which was not what she had been expecting on a Tuesday. Her name was Patricia Okafor, and she had the particular quality of a woman who had managed crises long enough to stop being surprised by them. But even she paused in the stairwell doorway for a full 2 seconds when she saw the NCIS badges and the locked corridor, and Gerald Hicks standing against the wall with the expression of a man who had not slept and was not going to sleep anytime soon. Rachel was still there. She had told herself twice that her shift was ending and she should go home, and both times something had kept her feet on the 5th floor. Partially, it was practical. Kerrigan had asked her to stay available for the formal statement. Partially, it was something else, something harder to name. The feeling of a person who has pulled a thread and watched an entire structure begin to unravel and cannot quite walk away until they know how far the unraveling goes. Patricia came to her first. She looked at Rachel with an expression that was not unfriendly but was very direct. "Tell me what I'm walking into," Rachel told her. The condensed version, the operational version, the pillow, the nails, Voss in custody, Donna Briggs under questioning, NCIS on the floor, Admiral Montgomery currently with his daughter in a secured room at the north end of the corridor. Patricia listened without interrupting. When Rachel finished, Patricia said, "How long have you been here?" "Since 10:15 last night." Patricia looked at her for a moment. Are you all right? The question caught Rachel slightly off guard because it was not the question she had been expecting. She had been expecting something administrative. Yes, she said. Then more honestly, I will be. Patricia nodded. I'm going to need your full statement before you go. And I want you to know that what I am hearing from Torres and from Hicks about your actions tonight is going to be reflected accurately in this hospital's internal documentation. Whatever comes next, and something is definitely coming next, your record of tonight is going to be clear. Rachel looked at her. What is coming next? Patricia held her gaze. The hospital board is going to convene an emergency session at 8 a.m. I've already been notified. The legal team is on its way. When a sitting attending physician is taken into federal custody from a hospital floor, the board meets. She paused. There will be questions about oversight, about how 12 days of this went undocumented as a potential physical cause, about why a part-time nurse on a substitution shift was the one who found it. And about who knew, Rachel said. And about who knew, Patricia confirmed. I want you to prepare for the possibility that there will be people in that board meeting who are more interested in managing the institution's liability than in understanding what actually happened to that young woman. That is not a hypothetical. That is a certainty. She looked at Rachel steadily. I am telling you this not to frighten you. I am telling you because you should walk into whatever comes next with your eyes fully open. Rachel absorbed this. 6 years at St. Mary's had taught her enough about how institutional self-protection worked. She had seen it in smaller forms. The incident report that got softened in revision. The complaint that got routed to a committee and never came back. The nurse whose documentation of a medication error became the center of a very quiet conversation with HR. She knew what systems did when they were threatened from inside. I have a copy of everything I documented last night, she said. I sent it to my personal email before I gave Torres my phone. Patricia looked at her with something that was almost a smile. Good, she said. Keep it. 6:15 a.m. Admiral Victor Montgomery came to find Rachel himself. She was in the small family consultation room at the end of the East Corridor, writing her formal statement for Kerrigan, and she heard the knock and said, Come in, without looking up, expecting Solis or Torres. She looked up. He was in his 50s, with a kind of physical presence that came from decades of being the person in the room who made final decisions. He was not in uniform. He had come from wherever he had been in civilian clothes, which made him look simultaneously like a regular person and completely not like a regular person, the way people with that kind of authority always carry it, regardless of what they're wearing. His eyes were the same dark, precise eyes as his daughter's. Right now, they were carrying something that had nothing to do with operational authority and everything to do with what a father's face looks like after a night like this one. He sat down across from her without being invited, which was not rude. It was just the movement of a man who was used to rooms that were already his when he entered them. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, She told me everything you did, in the order you did it. She has a very precise memory. She does, Rachel agreed. She also told me that you sat with her, that you stayed. He paused. After you found it, after the security team arrived and the situation was documented, you stayed. There was more to do. There's always more to do. Most people use that as a reason to move on to the next thing. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. I have spent 30 years making decisions that I believed were the right ones. Decisions that cost things. Decisions that had consequences I didn't fully understand until later. I believed I was protecting my country. I still believe that. But I did not protect my daughter. He said it plainly, without the hedging that people usually apply to their own failures when they're powerful enough to have audiences. I trusted the wrong man because he performed trustworthiness very well for a very long time. And while I was overseas doing what I believed was important, my daughter was in a hospital bed in agony, and the people around her had been arranged by someone I trusted to make sure nobody helped her. Rachel said carefully, "She held it together. Through all of it, she never stopped thinking clearly, even when she was in pain. She's extraordinary." Something moved through his expression. "She's her mother's daughter," he said quietly. Then, "And she's going to need time away from here, away from the things I've built and the enemies I've made. I'm asking myself right now whether the work I've been doing is worth what it's cost." "What has it produced?" Rachel asked. "Your case, what you've been building." He looked at her steadily for a moment. "Evidence of a network operating inside the military command structure that has been redirecting intelligence assets for private financial benefit. 3 senior officers, significant, the kind of thing that, when it becomes public, will be very large news." He paused. "Admiral Hargrove is one of the 3. He is the one with the most to lose and the most operational access. And now, because of what you found in that pillow, the evidence I built and the operation I've run is no longer the only thing pointing at him. His own mechanism, the thing he built to pressure me, is now pointing back at him with a federal evidentiary chain attached to it." Rachel thought about this. Hargrove had tried to stop the Admiral by hurting the Admiral's daughter. And in doing so, he had not just failed to stop the Admiral, he had handed the Admiral's case an additional layer of criminal evidence that would be significantly harder to dismiss than financial records and redirected intelligence reports. A physical crime, a hospital, a 21-year-old girl, 9 nails in a pillow, the kind of evidence that juries understand immediately. "He made it worse for himself," Rachel said. "Significantly worse," the Admiral said, "because he underestimated what was in that pillow." Rachel looked at him. "Not the nails," he said, "my daughter." 6:33 a.m. Kerrigan found Rachel back in the corridor at 6:33 with an update that came in 3 parts. The first part was that Donna Briggs had given a full statement. She had been approached by Voss 6 weeks ago and told that the Montgomery case required special handling, that the patient had a history of psychiatric issues that predated the admission, and that the institutional interest was best served by ensuring the psychiatric diagnosis was maintained. Donna had been told this was a liability protection matter. She had not been told about the pillow. She had been used as a layer, exactly as Kerrigan had said, given enough information to enforce the protocol, not enough to understand what the protocol was protecting. "She cooperated fully?" Rachel asked. "Fully. She's frightened and she's angry, and she has 22 years of genuinely good nursing behind her that someone used as a tool without her consent." Kerrigan's tone was carefully neutral. "That won't erase her role in enforcing the conditions that kept Lila isolated, but it changes the legal picture." Rachel nodded. She thought about Donna's face in the corridor at 3:19, the fractional stop, the fear underneath the professional blankness, the fear of someone who had been positioned without their full knowledge. She was not ready to forgive it, but she could understand it. Those 2 things could coexist. "The second thing," Kerrigan said, "Commander Deke was taken into custody at 6:08 this morning at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. He was attempting to board a flight to Zurich." Rachel closed her eyes for 1 second. Opened them. He was running. He had a bag packed that suggested he had been planning to run for several days. Not a panicked exit, a planned one. He had a timeline. Something was supposed to happen before now that would have made his exit unremarkable. When it didn't happen, Kerrigan paused. "When you found the pillow, the timeline broke. He moved the exit up, but he didn't move it up fast enough. What was supposed to happen?" Kerrigan looked at her. "Lila was supposed to be transferred to the psychiatric unit this morning, 7 a.m. The paperwork was already filed. Once she was transferred, the pillow would have been removed with the room linens, laundered, gone. No evidence, no crime, just a young woman in a psychiatric ward who had been telling everyone something was wrong with her pillow for 2 weeks. Rachel felt the cold weight of that land fully. 7 a.m. She had found it at 3:15. She had less than 4 hours of margin. If she had followed protocol and called Voss instead of going into that room, if she had walked past that door at 11 p.m. instead of stopping, if the nurse who was supposed to be on this shift hadn't called in sick, if, the whole night was constructed of fractional moments that could have gone differently. But they hadn't. They had gone exactly as they had gone, and the margin between what happened and what almost happened was the length of 40 seconds standing outside a door in the dark. The third thing, Kerrigan said, her tone changed on those 3 words. Not more serious. The night had been serious throughout, but different, more careful. The burner phone Voss used, the number he sent the message to. We traced it. She paused. It did not go to Hargrove. It went to someone inside this hospital. Rachel went very still. Inside this building. Someone with an administrative credential. Someone who has been in this building all night. Kerrigan watched Rachel's face. Someone who knew about the pillow before Torres arrived on the floor. Rachel's mind moved fast. Not Donna. Donna hadn't known about the pillow itself. Not Voss. Voss was the one who sent the message. Not Hicks. Hicks had been with her. She thought about every person who had moved through the 5th floor in the past 3 hours. She thought about who had access, who had credentials, who had been present and had not yet been accounted for in a way that fully closed off the question. Who? She asked. Kerrigan said a name. Rachel heard it and felt the specific, disorienting jolt of a thing that reframes everything that came before it. Not shock exactly, more like the sensation of a puzzle clicking into a shape that was slightly different from the shape she'd been building, and realizing that the difference explained several things she had filed as small and moved past. The name Kerrigan said was Dr. Elaine Marsh, the psychiatrist who had written the somatic disorder diagnosis on day 3. The one whose consultation notes had sounded like a door being welded shut, who had met with Lila Montgomery once for 40 minutes and had produced documentation so thorough and so definitive that no subsequent physician on the case had looked past it, whose notes had been the foundation on which the entire edifice of Lila's suffering was built. Not a buffer, not a layer. The architect of the diagnostic framework that had made everything else possible. She's still in the building, Kerrigan said. She has a 7 a.m. patient scheduled. She came in at 6:15. She does not yet know we have the burner phone trace. She looked at Rachel. I'm telling you this because you are going to see her before we bring her in, and I need you to act exactly as if you don't know. Can you do that? Rachel looked at Kerrigan. She thought about 40 minutes. The length of one psychiatric consultation. The amount of time Elaine Marsh had needed to sit across from a 21-year-old girl in genuine pain and produce documentation that would ensure that girl suffered in a medically sanctioned way for the next 12 days, and that anyone who questioned it would be directed back to those notes as the authoritative final word. Yes, Rachel said, I can do that. 7:02 a.m. She saw Marsh in the corridor near the elevator at 7:02. The psychiatrist was a woman in her late 40s, precise in her movements and her appearance, carrying a tablet and a coffee cup and projecting the kind of controlled morning person energy that Rachel had always found slightly suspicious in people who worked in hospitals, because nobody who had been doing this job long enough was a morning person. She looked at the activity on the 5th floor. Kerrigan, the second NCIS officer, Torres still present, 3 additional personnel Rachel didn't recognize, and she slowed her walk by a fraction of a step, just enough to recalibrate before continuing forward. She saw Rachel. She stopped. Nurse Pierce, she said. Her voice was pleasant, the specific pleasantness of a psychiatrist, calibrated to the frequency that says, I see you, and I am not threatening, and I am curious, but not alarmed. You're still here. You were on last night? Substituting, Rachel said. Her voice was completely even. She could feel her pulse in her ears. It was a busy night. I heard there was an incident with a Montgomery patient. Marsh's expression arranged itself into professional concern. I understand she had a significant pain episode. Several, Rachel said, over the course of the night. That's consistent with what I documented. The somatic pattern in that patient has a high nocturnal component. It's very common in grief-adjacent presentations. She shook her head slightly. She's a difficult case, resistant to the psychiatric framework. It happens. Rachel held her gaze and said nothing. Is she being transferred this morning? Marsh asked. I had recommended the inpatient psychiatric unit. I thought it was scheduled for today. The transfer has been postponed, Rachel said. There have been some developments in her case. Something moved in Marsh's eyes, small and fast and immediately covered. What kind of developments? Rachel heard Kerrigan's footsteps behind her. Dr. Marsh, Kerrigan said. I'm Special Agent Dana Kerrigan, NCIS. I need you to come with me. Marsh turned toward Kerrigan. The pleasant, professional composure held for exactly 2 more seconds. Rachel counted them. And then it didn't hold anymore. Not collapse, not panic, just a very precise withdrawal. The expression of a person who has decided that the thing they were pretending is no longer worth the energy of pretending. I'd like to speak with my attorney, Marsh said. That's your right, Kerrigan said. You can make that call as soon as we've read you your rights and processed your credentials. She gestured toward the room Torres was standing near. This way. Rachel watched Marsh walk past her. As the psychiatrist moved by, she turned her head and looked at Rachel directly, and Rachel looked back. It lasted less than a second. Then Marsh looked away and kept walking, and Rachel stood in the corridor of St. Mary's Memorial as the morning light came through the end windows and the day shift began arriving in 1s and 2s, and the 5th floor returned, gradually and imperfectly, to something that looked like a functioning hospital floor. 7:29 a.m. Lila came to find her before Rachel could leave. She was dressed in her own clothes, jeans, a navy pullover, her hair pulled back in the kind of simple knot that suggested she had not slept but had made deliberate choices about how to face the morning. She looked less like a patient than she had looked at any point in 12 days, which was because she wasn't one anymore. Her father was behind her, a few steps back, giving her the space to do the things she had decided to do. She stood in front of Rachel and for a moment didn't say anything. She had said things all night, precise and organized and controlled, and this was clearly different. This was the thing underneath the precision. I need you to know something, she said finally. You don't have to, Rachel started. I need you to know it, Lila said. There were 4 nights, the 3rd, the 4th, the 8th, and the 11th, where I almost signed the transfer papers. The psychiatric unit. They brought them 3 times. I refused. But on those 4 nights I thought about it. I thought that maybe they were right, that maybe something was wrong with me, and I was too stubborn to admit it. She paused. And every time I got to that place, I thought about the fact that I knew what I felt. I knew the difference between grief and a nail in a pillow, and I held on to that. I held on to it because letting go of it meant letting go of the truth, and the truth was the only thing I had. She met Rachel's eyes. You found the truth, but I held it for 12 days, and I need you to know that I know that. Both of us did our part. Rachel felt the back of her throat tighten. She kept her face steady. Yes, she said, both of us. I'm going to testify, Lila said, against Voss, against Marsh, against Deek, against Hargrove. All of it, whatever it takes, however long it takes. I am going to stand in every room they put me in and say exactly what happened. She paused. And I'm going to find the other 2 women, the ones before me. I promised Kerrigan, and I'm promising you, they are not going to spend another year thinking they were the problem. Rachel looked at her, 21 years old, 12 days of deliberate torture, and standing here in the corridor of the hospital that did it to her, already building the plan forward. Your father is going to have something to say about you doing all of that. Lila almost smiled. It was small and very real. My father knows better than to argue with me about it. From behind her, the Admiral said nothing, but the expression on his face said that this was entirely accurate. 8:04 a.m. Rachel finally left the building at 8:04 a.m. She had given her formal statement to Kerrigan, signed the documentation, handed over the notes she had made through the night, and received her phone back with a formal evidence receipt. The text, "Put it back, Rachel," was logged and attributed, which she would find out later had come from Marsh's personal cell number, because Marsh had been arrogant enough to believe it would never be traced, or desperate enough not to care. She walked through the lobby of St. Mary's Memorial and out the main entrance into a morning that was just beginning to be warm, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let herself feel the full weight of the last 10 hours. Her car was in the staff lot. She had a 12-minute drive home. She had not eaten since 7 p.m. the previous night, and she was tired in a way that went deeper than the body. The specific exhaustion of someone who has spent 10 hours holding something important in their hands and has finally been allowed to set it down. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. "Is this Rachel Pierce?" The voice was a woman's, quiet, a little uncertain. "Yes. My name is Andrea Cowell. I was a patient at St. Mary's Memorial 4 years ago." A pause. "An NCIS agent called me this morning. She told me about what happened last night. She told me about a pillow." The voice caught slightly. "She told me about a nurse." Rachel stopped walking. The staff lot was 30 feet ahead of her. The morning was clear and cool and very quiet. "Andrea," she said, I needed to call. I needed to call the person who..." A breath. "I've been in therapy for 4 years. 4 years of twice-a-week sessions working through what they told me was an anxiety disorder. 4 years of wondering why I couldn't just be normal, why nights were so hard, why I couldn't trust my own body." Her voice was steady, but underneath it something was shaking, the deep structural shaking of a person whose foundation has just been rebuilt on a different truth. "And this morning I woke up and an NCIS agent told me that I was right, that the pain was real, that there was something real in that pillow, and someone did it to me deliberately, and the doctors who told me I was broken, they knew." Rachel stood on the sidewalk outside St. Mary's Memorial and listened. "I just needed to say thank you," Andrea said. "I know you weren't there 4 years ago. I know you couldn't have been, but you found it last night. And finding it last night means I didn't imagine it. It means I wasn't..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "You weren't," Rachel said. "You weren't any of it. It was done to you. And you survived it. And now it's going to be answered for." A long pause. "Is she okay? The girl last night? Lila?" "Yes," Rachel said. "She's okay. She's more than okay. Tell her..." Andrea stopped, started again. "Tell her she's not alone." Rachel held the phone against her ear and looked up at the sky above the parking lot of St. Mary's Memorial and felt something move through her chest that she didn't have a precise name for. Relief was part of it. Grief was part of it. The specific cellular exhaustion of someone who has held something important for exactly as long as it needed to be held and has just been given permission to rest. "I'll tell her," Rachel said. "I promise." She stood there for a moment after the call ended. Then she started walking toward her car. The morning was fully light now, the kind of clear October morning that doesn't know or care what happened inside the buildings beneath it, that just keeps arriving with its ordinary, indifferent brightness, regardless of what the night held. Rachel got in her car. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel and her eyes straight ahead. Then she took a breath, deep and slow, the first fully deep breath she had taken since 10:47 p.m. the previous night, when she had pulled into this same parking lot and walked toward a building and a floor and a room she hadn't known would change everything. She thought about 9 nails in a pillow. She thought about the 40 seconds she had stood outside a door listening. She thought about the word psychosomatic, written in a chart by a woman who would now face federal charges for writing it. She thought about Andrea Cowell in therapy for 4 years for a pain that someone put in her pillow. She thought about Lila standing in the corridor in her own clothes, saying both of us did our part. She thought about what it meant to be invisible in a system, and how sometimes being invisible is the thing that lets you walk into a room that someone else has decided is closed. Then she started the car and drove home. 3 days later, Rachel did not go back to St. Mary's Memorial on Wednesday. She did not go back on Thursday either. She slept for 11 hours on Tuesday, which was something she had not done since her 20s, and woke up in the early afternoon with the particular disorientation of a person whose body has finally collected on a debt that the mind had been refusing to acknowledge. She made coffee. She sat at her kitchen table. She read the news on her phone and found, buried on page 3 of the digital edition of the Washington Post, a 4-paragraph item about a federal investigation into personnel at St. Mary's Memorial Hospital, connected to a broader NCIS inquiry involving military command corruption. No names yet, no details. The kind of careful, sourced, but restrained reporting that meant a larger story was being held until the legal machinery had moved far enough forward that publishing it wouldn't compromise the prosecution. She put her phone down and drank her coffee and felt the strange, suspended quality of a person who has been at the center of something significant and has now been returned to the ordinary texture of their life, while the significant thing continues without them. Her phone rang at 2:17 p.m. It was a number she recognized. Kerrigan. "How are you sleeping?" the agent asked. "Better than I expected," Rachel said. "What's happening?" "Voss gave a partial statement yesterday. He's cooperating to a degree, enough to confirm the connection to Marsh and Deke, but not enough to fully implicate Hargrove directly. His attorney is negotiating." A pause. "Marsh is not cooperating at all. She has retained outside counsel, and she is contesting every element of the forensic evidence. She is going to be a fight." "She built the whole thing," Rachel said. "She knows if she cooperates, there's nothing left to negotiate with." Exactly right. She's calculating that without her testimony, the chain between Hargrove and the hospital operation is circumstantial enough to be arguable. Kerrigan's tone was level, not alarmed. "She's wrong about that, but she doesn't know yet what else we have." "What else do you have?" "I can't give you the details, but I want you to know that the evidence chain you established on the night of October 14th is holding up under everything Marsh's attorney has thrown at it. The documentation, the timing, the chain of custody, it is clean. Her attorney argued the pillow was tampered with post-discovery. The timestamp on Torres's recording and the sequence you created before he arrived makes that argument effectively impossible." Rachel thought about the 45 seconds she had spent deciding whether to wait for Hicks before she touched anything. The instinct that had made her stop. "Good," she said. "I also wanted to tell you that Commander Deke entered a guilty plea this morning." Rachel set down her coffee cup. "Already?" "He had very little room to negotiate. He was caught at the airport with a pre-packed bag and a phone containing communication records going back 8 months. He also, it turns out, had been operating under the assumption that Hargrove would provide legal protection if the operation was ever exposed. When Hargrove's attorney made clear that no such protection was coming, Deke's willingness to cooperate increased dramatically. A pause that contains something dry. Loyalty in these networks is entirely conditional on the network continuing to function. When it stops functioning, everyone looks out for themselves. "What did he give you?" "Everything. The full operational timeline. How the hospital was selected, how Voss was recruited, which happened 3 years ago, not 4, and involves significant financial incentive. How Marsh was brought in. How the room assignment was arranged. how the communication blackout around the Admiral was maintained. Another pause. And the two previous patients. He confirmed both of them. He was involved in both. He did not put the objects in the pillows himself in those cases. That was Voss. But he coordinated the access and the family targeting. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Andrea Cowell called me Tuesday morning. I know, she's been in contact with our office. She's agreed to provide a statement. Kerrigan's voice shifted slightly. That call she made to you, I want you to know that was her first direct engagement with what happened to her. She hadn't been able to talk about it to anyone except her therapist, in the framing of anxiety disorder. Calling you was the first time she said out loud to another person, "It was done to me." That matters. It changes the psychological landscape for her in ways that are going to be significant going forward. Rachel felt the weight of that settle. And the other one, the woman in Ohio? She's still processing. She has a family. It's complicated. But she's aware and she's in contact with a victim advocate. She'll get there. What about Hargrove? A longer pause this time. That is moving at a different speed and at a different level than I can fully speak to. What I can tell you is that the Admiral's case, the operational work he has been building for 8 months, was formally submitted to the appropriate oversight committee 2 days ago. The submission includes everything he compiled, plus the evidentiary record from what happened at St. Mary's. Those two bodies of evidence together are not circumstantial. Together, they are comprehensive. She paused again. Hargrove has not been arrested yet, but the people around him are starting to separate themselves from him, which is the way these things go. The structure collapses from the outside in. Rachel understood. Big cases moved at their own pace. What mattered was that the pace was forward. I have one more thing, Kerrigan said. The hospital board met Wednesday morning. Patricia Okafor gave a full account. I understand it was a significant meeting. What happened? You'll hear from Patricia directly, but I want you to be prepared for the fact that what the board decided has implications for your position there. She said it carefully, not ominously, but carefully. Call Patricia today. The call ended. Rachel sat at her kitchen table for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Patricia Okafor. Patricia answered on the second ring. I was going to call you this afternoon, she said. How are you? Kerrigan says the board met Wednesday. It did. A breath. I'm going to be direct with you because you have earned directness. The board met for 3 hours. The legal team was present. The discussion was, as I anticipated, significantly focused on institutional liability. There were board members who wanted the narrative of this situation to be about a rogue physician acting outside institutional oversight, with the hospital as the party that cooperated fully with the investigation once the situation came to light. A pause. I objected to that framing very specifically. I told them that the accurate narrative was that this physician had operated inside this institution for 4 years, had supervised 3 patients under a fraudulent diagnostic framework, and had done so with the support of an administrative and psychiatric infrastructure that required either active participation or willful blindness to sustain. I told them that the institution's credibility going forward depended on its willingness to say that accurately rather than manage it. How did that go? Rachel asked. The room was very quiet for about 90 seconds, Patricia said. Then the board chair said that he agreed with me, and then a majority of the board agreed with him. Another breath. The hospital has decided to issue a public statement acknowledging systemic failure in the oversight of the Montgomery case and both prior cases. They are establishing an independent patient advocacy review in all cases involving psychiatric consultation on patients with negative objective workups. And they are offering full settlement to Andrea Cowell, to the woman in Ohio, and to Lila Montgomery without requiring a non-disclosure agreement. Rachel absorbed this. Settlements without NDAs meant the women could talk, could tell their stories, could say the name St. Mary's Memorial in connection with what had been done to them, without a legal consequence pressing them into silence. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, quite large. "And my position?" Rachel asked. "Your position," Patricia said carefully, "was discussed at length. There is a faction on the board that is concerned about the liability implications of a staff nurse unilaterally deviating from documented protocol in a high-profile patient case, regardless of the outcome. That faction wanted a formal notation in your record." A pause. "I told them that if they put a negative notation in Rachel Pierce's record for what she did on October 14th, I would resign my position effective immediately, and I would make the reason public." Another pause. "The notation will not appear in your record." Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, opened them. "Patricia, the board is also recommending, not yet confirmed, that your part-time status be revised to a full-time position with a corresponding change in your floor assignment." Patricia's voice was very dry and very precise. "They believe it would be in the institution's interest to have you inside the building on a more consistent basis. I supported this recommendation." Rachel looked at the wall of her kitchen. 6 years of night shifts. 6 years of being part-time, which in hospital language meant somewhere between essential and disposable. A full-time position meant benefits, a consistent schedule, the ability to plan further than 2 weeks ahead. It meant being the person who was always there instead of the person who was called when someone else wasn't. "Tell them yes," she said. "I already told them you would say yes," Patricia said, and there was something in her voice that was unmistakably warm. "Come in Monday." 1 week later. The phone call Rachel had been half expecting and half dreading came on a Thursday evening while she was making dinner. The number was not one she recognized, but she had been receiving calls from unknown numbers for 10 days and had learned to answer them because sometimes they were journalists looking for a quote she was not going to give, and sometimes they were something else entirely. This was something else entirely. "Rachel Pierce?" The voice was a woman's, older, precise, with a cadence that suggested formality was the default register and warmth was something deployed deliberately. "Yes. My name is Senator Clara Whitman. I chair the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Oversight. I have been briefed on the events of October 14th and on the evidentiary record from the NCIS investigation." A pause. "I would like to speak with you about your willingness to provide testimony before the subcommittee. Your account, specifically the chain of events, the documentation you established, and the systemic conditions at St. Mary's Memorial that allowed this operation to function for 4 years, is directly relevant to legislation I am pursuing regarding protection of military family members in civilian medical settings." Rachel turned off the stove. She sat down at the kitchen table, which had become, in the past 10 days, the place where significant things happened. "You want me to testify. I want you to tell the truth in a room where the truth will produce a legal result that goes beyond the individual prosecution of the people involved in this case. I want your testimony to build a wall that makes it significantly harder for anyone to do this to another military family ever again." A pause. "I understand this is not a small ask. I understand it comes with visibility you may not want and with pressures that are significant. I am asking you anyway because the people who deserve to have this told in the largest possible room are the women who sat in those beds. And you are the person whose account makes it possible to tell it." Rachel thought about Andrea Cowell calling her on Tuesday morning. 4 years, twice-a-week therapy, the specific, devastating belief that the problem was inside herself. She thought about the woman in Ohio whose name she still didn't know, who had a family and was still processing. She thought about the women who might come after them if the machine that had been built at St. Mary's was prosecuted as an isolated incident rather than examined as a symptom of something that could exist anywhere there was access and motive and a physician willing to be recruited. "Yes," Rachel said, "I'll testify." The senator's voice shifted slightly. Just slightly. I appreciate that more than I can properly convey right now. We'll be in touch with the logistics. A pause. And Nurse Pierce, for what it's worth, coming from someone who has spent 20 years in rooms full of people who make decisions about other people's lives, what you did on that floor on October 14th is exactly the thing we are supposed to do and almost never do. You held the line when it would have been far easier and far safer to walk past it. After the call ended, Rachel sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The dinner she had been making was going cold on the stove, and she didn't move to fix it. She was thinking about something the Admiral had said in that small consultation room at 5 in the morning when the night was ending and everything was shifting into the next phase. He had said, "What you found in that pillow was not the nails. It was my daughter." She had been thinking about that sentence for 10 days, about what it meant to find something that someone else had been holding alone, about what it meant to be the person in the hallway who stopped. The doorbell rang. She opened it to find Lila Montgomery standing on her porch. Not with her father, not with security or an NCIS escort or any of the apparatus that had surrounded her for the past 10 days. Just Lila, in jeans and a gray coat, with her hair down and a look on her face that Rachel hadn't seen before. Lighter somehow. Not resolved, not finished, but lighter in the way that a person is lighter when the heaviest thing they've been carrying has been acknowledged and set down and replaced with something that has actual forward motion in it. "I found your address from Patricia," Lila said. "She said you wouldn't mind." "I don't mind," Rachel said. She opened the door wider. "Come in." They sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea that Rachel made because it was the thing to do, and for a moment neither of them spoke. They had said significant things to each other in a hospital corridor at 5 a.m. and had looked at each other across the evidence of something terrible, and had both held their ground in their own way. And sometimes after 2 people have done that together, there is a period of simple quiet that is not awkward, but is necessary. "I spoke to Andrea yesterday," Lila said finally. "We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. "How was that?" "Hard and important. And," she stopped, tried again. "She said something I keep thinking about. She said the worst part of the 4 years wasn't the pain. It was losing her trust in her own perception. She said she stopped being able to tell the difference between what was real and what she had convinced herself was real. She said she second-guessed everything for 4 years. Not just her health, everything. Her judgment, her instincts, the things she thought she knew." Lila looked at her tea. "And I understand that. I was 12 days in and I was already starting to slide. On the 8th night I looked at the transfer papers and I thought maybe they're right. Maybe I am the problem. 12 days. She had 16. She looked up. And then 4 years of being told the hospital confirmed it." Rachel said, "She called you the morning she found out." "She did." Something moved through Lila's expression. "She didn't know me. She called me because she needed to say it to someone who had been in the same bed. Someone who understood the specific quality of that particular doubt." She paused. "We're going to meet in person next month. Her and the woman in Ohio, her name is Margot, I found out, and me. Kerrigan's victim advocate is helping coordinate. We're going to be in the same room." "That's good," Rachel said. "That's really good. I want you to be there." Rachel looked at her. "Lila, I'm serious, not as an official witness, not as a hospital representative or a legal figure, just as the person who—" She stopped. "You're the reason all 3 of us are going to be in that room knowing the truth instead of the lie. You should be there when we say it to each other." Rachel was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was warm, and the afternoon light was coming in at a low angle, and it was, Rachel thought, a remarkably ordinary room in which to be having a conversation about extraordinary things. "Okay," she said. "I'll be there." Lila smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes, the kind that takes up its full space. It was the first time Rachel had seen her smile, and it changed her face completely. Not into someone younger or softer, but into someone fully present in the world in a way that 12 days of managed suffering had not been able to produce. "My father wants to meet with you properly," she said. "Not at 5 in the morning in a hospital. He said he has things he wants to say that he didn't have the capacity to say correctly that night. He said them fine. He doesn't think so. He is a man who believes in doing things correctly. He considers that conversation incomplete." She paused. "Also, he would like to personally brief you on what is happening with Hargrove. He says you earned that information." Rachel thought about the Admiral in that consultation room, the plainness of his self-accounting, the absence of the hedging and reframing that powerful people usually apply to their own failures. He had looked at what had been done to his daughter while he was building his case, and he had not found a way to make it not his fault. That was a rare quality in anyone, and rarer still in men who had spent 30 years being the person who set the terms of accountability for others. "Tell him yes," Rachel said, "and tell him the conversation that night was complete enough." The hearing. 6 weeks after the night of October 14th, Rachel Pierce sat in a hearing room on Capitol Hill in a navy blazer she had bought for the occasion, with her prepared statement on the table in front of her, and 11 senators arranged across the elevated platform looking down at her, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not fear, not the particular performance anxiety of someone who was unaccustomed to visibility. She felt calm, the specific, grounded calm of someone who is in the right place, doing the right thing for the right reasons, and knows it with their whole body. Senator Whitman called the hearing to order. She described the purpose and the scope and the legislative goals. She introduced Rachel with a precision and economy that conveyed the relevant facts without embellishment, because the facts were sufficient. Then she said, "Nurse Pierce, please tell this committee what you found on October 14th. And Rachel told it. She told it the way she had told it to Kerrigan at 4 in the morning, from the beginning, without skipping anything because it seemed small. She told it without performance and without apology and without the hedging that turns a true account into a managed presentation. She told it in the plain, direct, specific language of a person who has spent 11 years paying attention to things that matter and has learned that the only way to honor what matters is to describe it accurately. She told them about the 40 seconds outside a door. She told them about 9 nails in a pillow. She told them about a 21-year-old girl who held the truth for 12 days while everyone around her told her it wasn't there. She told them about Andrea and Margot in the 4 years, in the 16 days, and what it costs a person to lose trust in their own perception. She told them what a system looks like when someone has deliberately arranged it to make suffering invisible. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Then a senator from Georgia, an older man who had been taking notes throughout and had said nothing, set his pen down and looked at her. "Nurse Pierce," he said, "in your professional assessment, is what happened at St. Mary's Memorial replicable? Can this be done elsewhere with the same infrastructure?" Rachel looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said, "it can be done anywhere there is a physician willing to be recruited, an institution that prioritizes liability management over patient advocacy, and a patient whose word can be made to seem less credible than the documentation surrounding them. Those conditions are not rare. They exist in various forms in medical settings across this country. What happened at St. Mary's was not an aberration. It was a blueprint that worked twice before anyone stopped it. The silence in the room after that was the kind of silence that means something has been said that is going to require action. Senator Whitman looked at Rachel. What would stop it? Rachel had thought about this answer for 6 weeks, not just since the hearing was scheduled. Since the morning she drove home from St. Mary's Memorial with the October sun coming through her windshield and her hands on the wheel and the whole shape of the night behind her. "A nurse who goes into the room," she said. "That's the first thing. A culture that trains and empowers clinical staff to act on what they observe in a patient rather than what the documentation above them says to observe. A system that treats a patient's consistent, specific, persistent account of their own pain as data rather than liability. She paused. And oversight, real oversight, not the kind that reviews the paperwork after something goes wrong. The kind that asks, before anything goes wrong, who has access to this patient and what are they telling them, and does the pattern of this case make sense? Senator Whitman made a note. Several other senators made notes. The older man from Georgia picked his pen back up. Nurse Pierce, Senator Whitman said, on behalf of this committee, I want to thank you for what you did on October 14th and for what you are doing today. Both acts require something that is not guaranteed and should not be taken for granted. Both require a person who is willing to be the one who stops. Afterward, 3 months after the hearing, Hargrove was indicted on 7 counts. The indictment included military corruption charges from the Admiral's case and a conspiracy charge connected to the operation at St. Mary's. Voss received a 7-year sentence after his partial cooperation reduced the original recommendation. Marsh went to trial and was convicted on all counts. Commander Deke, whose cooperation had been comprehensive, received a reduced sentence and was placed in a protective custody arrangement that reflected how many people in the network wanted him not to testify. Donna Briggs was not charged. She cooperated fully, and her 22 years of documented patient care were taken into account. She resigned from St. Mary's Memorial in November. Rachel heard, through Patricia, that she had taken a position at a smaller facility in rural Virginia, where she was, by all accounts, working with the particular intensity of someone who has something to make right and has decided to spend the rest of her career making it. Andrea Cowell stopped seeing her anxiety disorder therapist in December, not because the healing was complete, but because the framework of the treatment had been built on a false foundation and needed to be rebuilt. She found a new therapist. The first session, Rachel was told, lasted 2 hours. Andrea described it as the first time she had told her whole story and had it land on the right ground. Margot, the woman in Ohio, testified at Marsh's trial. She took the stand with her husband beside her in the gallery, and she described 16 days of pain that she had spent 4 years believing was her own failure. And her voice did not waver once. Rachel watched from the back of the courtroom and thought about what Lila had said on the porch that Thursday evening. You're the reason all 3 of us are going to be in that room knowing the truth. Lila Montgomery returned to school in January. She was pursuing a degree in public health law. She had given by then 4 formal statements to 4 separate investigative bodies and had testified twice. And she had done all of it with the same precise, organized, completely unbroken quality that Rachel had first seen in a hospital bed at midnight when a young woman pressed her hands against her own skull and described needle pain to a nurse who was finally listening. Rachel started her full-time position at St. Mary's Memorial on the first Monday of November. The same floor, different schedule. She was there in the daytime now, and in the evenings, and occasionally still at night when coverage required it. And she walked the east corridor of the 5th floor as a person who knew what every room in it had held, what the walls had absorbed, what the silence of 3 a.m. in that corridor had covered for 4 years. She was not the same nurse who had driven to that building in the dark on October 14th, because no one passes through something like that unchanged, and she would not have wanted to pass through it unchanged. She had been changed in the direction of knowing more clearly what she was willing to hold and what she was willing to carry and what she would never walk past again, regardless of what the protocol said. On the last day of October, 1 month exactly after the night of the pillow, Rachel finished her evening shift and walked to her car in the staff lot and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel, the way she had sat on that October morning after everything. She thought about 9 nails. She thought about 40 seconds. She thought about the precise, specific weight of being the person who stops. Then she started the car and drove home, and the night was quiet and the road was clear. And somewhere across the country, 3 women were sleeping without pain. And that was the truest and most complete thing that Rachel Pierce had ever had a hand in building. Not just the evidence, not just the chain of custody, not just the testimony that would become legislation. The fact that they could sleep, that was enough. That had always been enough, and it always would be.